Channel's been doing really well lately. Viewer numbers through the roof, lots and lots of new subscribers coming. I've seemed to have hit a rich vein of topics. So you know what? Going to put a stop to that. Now talk about something really niche, really boutique that I think maybe 5 of you will watch. And that is what's going on with the Breitling logo at the moment. Where has the winged bee gone? What's happened to it? And more importantly, why I don't think you should hold your breath waiting for that winged bee to come back. Okay, so first of all, what I have to say here is I don't really have a dog in this fight. I quite like all the various Breitling logos, trademarks that have been used over the years. I quite like spelling the whole name. I quite like the family bee. Actually, something of a fan of the winged bee with an anchor. Important to point out. And I don't mind the OAPO one, although that one does AOPA one, although that one can be a little bland. I'm a little worried about its latest incarnation. And I quite like the twin jet one that turned up for a little bit during the 50s and 60s. But whilst I'm not particularly wedded to any one of those logos, I think they're all great. I do find the discussion around the logo, how wedded some people are to their logo, and why Breitling don't seem to want to make them happy, absolutely riveting. I know that makes me incredibly geeky, but it is. So now what I want to do is dive into that just a little bit. So understanding the Breitling logo, you need to have a really quick understanding of what I'm going to call the different epochs in Breitling history. There was really its inception, 1883, I think it was, to around about the First World War. That's a period of Leon and Gaston Breitling running the company. Then you had another period, still within the family, of Willie Breitling running the business from around about World War II, just before World War II, up until the Breitling part of the family left the company in 79-80. Then you've got the Schneider era, really from around about 1980 to about 2017. And then I'm going to call it the Kern era, 2017 to now, where the brand is trying to find a new way. The Breitling logo and its various iterations kind of matches those epochs. During that initial period where the brand was being established under Leon and Gaston Breitling, it tended just to use the full name, Breitling, in a kind of cursive script. Then during the Willie Breitling years, just before World War II, but most importantly post-World War II, during the 50s, 60s and 70s, when that real period of understanding graphic design language and the importance of logos, trademarks, those sorts of things became clear, then the Breitling name, the full name, kind of retreated to the background, and the Breitling family B became the official logo. You did occasionally see extras. We occasionally saw the AOPA logo. We did occasionally see the twin jet logo, but the family B was without doubt the standard logo during that period. During the Schneider years, there was some messiness at the beginning, a little bit of the standard B, but very quickly the standard Breitling logo was changed to become the winged bee with an anchor that everyone is now familiar with. And that was retained through the Schneider years, right up until the sale of Breitling by Teddy Schneider to the CVC Capital Partners Group, which is headed by, and the company was headed by George Kern. So I'm going to call that the George Kern era from 2017 to now. What you've seen during that time is a reversion to the family B as kind of the standard logo and a retreat from the winged bee. What makes this interesting to watch is that reversion from the winged bee to the family bee isn't popular with the customers. I think it would be fair to say that the vast majority of existing Breitling customers, those with Breitling watches, those who have had some warm feelings towards the brand over the last 30-something years, generally prefer the winged bee. I don't think that's particularly controversial. I think it's their Breitling. It's the one they know. I mean, if you were 20-something in 1980, you're now 67 or something now. So that is the period of Breitling that most people know. That is their logo. That is their Breitling. And if I've got my kind of rough history right, it is fascinating to me that the logo that most people associate with Breitling, something which was originally a family watch company, is not the logo of that family. It's a logo of a different person, an outsider, the Schneiders. It's a logo that has a really interesting meaning to Breitling if you think of Breitling as a company with a 137-year history. It's, on one hand, it's a logo of rebirth and success. On the other hand, it's also a reminder of failure. It's a logo that says that we collapsed and had to be bought, reborn, recreated in a new way. There's really interesting messaging for the company in that logo. Since coming into the leadership of Breitling, George Kern has made no secret of the fact to distance himself from the more recent past of the brand. He was much more strident in his very early days. He's backed off in his language a lot now. But when he first took over as head of Breitling, he was very critical of previous management, previous catalog decisions, previous marketing decisions, previous distribution systems. In fact, there was very little in the immediate past of Breitling that he seemed to have a lot of time for. And George Kern made no bones about his desire to return Breitling to something much bigger, much broader, much more ambitious than it had previously been. And I think that the winged bee logo is really part of that huge cultural shift that George Kern is trying to make in this company. What is often mentioned here is, and George Kern still occasionally talks about this, is that Breitling is more than just an aviation company, and that the winged bee tend to focus on pilots' watches and pilots, and he was emphasizing the whole air, sea, land scope. Many people have come back and said that's a bit disingenuous because the winged bee always had the anchor in it, was always put on dive watches and other kinds of watches, didn't seem to get in the way. What are you talking about, George? And I think George wasn't lying. I think there was an element of trying to get the wings were clearly the most prominent part of that logo. There was clearly a desire to step back from being just pilots' watches. But I also do think that there was another element of what George was aiming for when he said that he wanted to broaden Breitling and be more than it had been in its recent past. And what he was referring to, and this is one of those areas he used to say out loud, he doesn't so much anymore. What he was trying to get away from was not just the aviation focus, but the machismo that had come to infect not just the watches, but the whole company and what the company was trying to do. This wasn't just about big, blingy, 48 millimeter, really gaudy Bentley for Breitlings. This was also about infamous, parties at Baselworld. It was about, a lack of care for things like distribution and historic marketing. It was openly sexist advertising. These were all things that George Kern was trying to distance his new Breitling from. So what you saw in practice was John Travolta gets replaced by ex-Marine and much more down-to-earth Adam Driver. And he's added to, we now have a female alongside with Charlize Theron. The sports that Breitling now support are much more down to earth and are the sorts of things that normal people participate in: running, swimming, surfing, cycling. Bentley is replaced by a group of brands that are much more accessible, like Triumph, Ford, GM. And that's all being done at a time when Breitling are putting out videos, putting out, these sort of weird CGI things, reminding us of who the founders of Breitling were. Not just one of them either. They're calling there a squad, this idea of there's multiple people, reinforcing this idea that Breitling is a family business, it's a group activity, that it's inclusive of all sorts of different people. It's really this, as I say, this huge cultural shift in what the brand is. And the winged bee logo is part of that discussion about who is Breitling and where are they going. What you can see is that the winged bee has already been replaced on every collection that current management wants associated with the family. So the Chronomat, the Navitimer, the Super Chronomat, the Premier, the Classic Avi, all of these that hark back to Breitling family periods have all now just got the family B. Only 3 collections that I can see, the Professional, the Super Ocean, and the Avenger, which are clearly more contemporary focused, a little bit disconnected from the family origin, still retain the winged bee of the Schneider era. What I just said is still actually a little bit messy in that, for example, take the Chronomat, which is a family era collection, but is definitely riffing on a Schneider era aesthetic, comes with the family B. Conversely, the Super Ocean, which is clearly a family era collection, there were Super Oceans way back when the Breitling family ran the company. The contemporary one is still getting the Schneider era winged bee. Curiously, the family emblem is reserved for the Super Ocean Heritage, which is much more closely linked to the family. So it's a little bit messy. So all in all, this discussion about what's going on with the Breitling logo, the bee versus the winged bee, and where we're going to end up, is about so much more. In fact, it's barely about making an existing customer happy today. I think that that's almost irrelevant in this discussion. This is a discussion about the core of what it means to be Breitling. What is, or what are Breitling's values? What is fundamental to what they are versus what is temporary? What is fleeting? What can be dipped into but also dipped back out of? The importance of the logo, I think, for me, and the discussion around the cultural impacts of the logo is even more interesting when you consider that Breitling has shown itself more than happy to introduce individual watches and watch families that still do reflect the Schneider era kind of aesthetic. The Super Chronomat is without doubt the best example. Big, bold, brassy. It is everything in many ways that people kind of made fun of during the late Schneider era and what they thought, were the bad Breitlings. The new Breitling is perfectly happy to put out that watch, but it won't regress to giving that watch the logo. Breitling, regardless of what you and I think, the company's view is the logo is the sacred thing. The logo is the bearer of the cultural torch. It's the thing that sort of sets the tone. Individual watches come and go, but the logo stands forever. So I think it's it's hard to tell exactly where we're going to land, but right now I would be putting my money on the Family B becoming the default logo for probably 90% of Breitling watches moving forward, and the Winged Bee further and further moving back into history. In the 138-year history of Breitling, the Winged Bee with the anchor has been the logo of the company for 37 years. And even then, probably not the proudest years of the company. Either just the full name Breitling or the Family B was the logo for the other 101 and counting, and is generally associated with what management today would say is the glory years of Breitling, the years that they are trying to capture and build upon for the next 101 years. George Kern was recently interviewed by Felix Schultz on the OT, the podcast. Great episode. Recommend you all go see it. I'll see if I can get a link in the show notes below. And he was asked, what was the greatest challenge he found when he took over the company? And George responded by saying probably the biggest difficulty for him was not having his own management team with him to support him, and the arguments, the fights he had to have with his own management, with his own employees, and probably those times where he had to go against what his own customers wanted. And I think this logo was the logo change is probably key to a lot of those arguments. In the interview, George says at the end of the day, it's all just opinions until the rubber hits the road, and then you make your decision, you start selling product, and you see what happens. Results will tell you who got it right and who got it wrong. The results would seem to indicate that as much as his management at the time may have disagreed, as much as his customer base may have disagreed, George was right. Since that decision, not necessarily because of that decision, but since the decision to change the logo, Breitling's been on a roll. More popular with enthusiasts, more popular with the media, selling better, selling for higher values, doing better in resale. Pretty much any metric you can think of for assessing how a brand is doing, Breitling is doing better. So given that case, given the history, given the cultural changes that the current management is trying to make to existing Breitling, what that says about their vision for Breitling, not just now, not just in the next quarter, not just for the next couple of years' results, but where they want the company to be long term, I think the chance of the Winged Bee coming back is really low. I'm in two minds about that. On one hand, I kind of like that logo. I think it goes well on a dial. It looks good. On the other hand, I'm a huge fan of the cultural changes that are underway within Breitling. Not just because I think they're going to be successful, but because it's a Breitling that I prefer. And you know what? So if the price of baking in the Breitling that I think is the best version of Breitling, baking in the idea of Breitling being the kind of company, the kind of ideals, the kind of values that align with mine, means I lose the wings and I just get the bee, you know what? I'm okay with that. Anyway, what do you think? Do you reckon that this is all just smoke and mirrors and that there's something else going on? It's an interesting test. I mean, everything we hear is that, people like the current management of Breitling are nothing but soulless bankers, only interested in pumping up short-term results in order to, turn a quick profit. How do you square that with the fact that in some ways they're fighting with their own customer base over philosophical long-term issues like the logo? Do you think they're just idiots and they've screwed it up? Or do you think that there is this kind of larger, more existential debate going on? Love to know your ideas on this. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. This has been a deep dive into a niche topic designed to make sure that no one watches my channel anymore. I would love to keep doing this sort of stuff. It's going to happen if you guys like and subscribe. So do that and I'll keep doing this kind of stuff. See you later. Bye.